Exactly 1 year ago, I swapped living in a house for living in my van. And over the last few weeks, you guys have been firing in loads of questions such as what do I do for mail and how do I get insurance, bearing in mind I've got no fixed address. So in this video, I'll deep dive into those questions as well as plenty of others that you've been asking. If you're wondering why I'm not in the van, I'm actually traveling in Asia for the next 6 weeks, hoping to see out the UK winter, and then I'll be back in the UK in the springtime. Anyway, let's jump into the questions. So we'll start with the most common question, which is how do I get mail and how do I insure the vehicle with no fixed address? I'll explain what I do and then I'll give you some potential solutions if you're not able to do what I can. So in relation to my van and the insurance, it's actually registered to my accountant, which is in a different town. So he gets all the correspondence in relation to the van. It's registered there. So he then forwards anything on to me. And on the rare occasion that I get personal mail, I get it sent to a friend. So if my accountant needs to forward anything on, it goes there. And for example, DVLA stuff would actually go to my friend's house as well. But if you don't have a business or are struggling to get a friend or family member to send your mail through to, there's a couple of other solutions I've got for you. The first one is when I had storage for the first few months when I got the van, when I registered with them, they said that I can get mail sent there as well. Now, I'm not sure if that would have been an additional to what I was paying, which I think was probably around £50 a month, or whether it was all part of the service, but it was very useful to know anyway. Another option, which is quite a commonplace, is to get a PO box, so you just get your mail sent there. But what I'm not too sure about is whether you would be able to get insurance to a PO box. I suspect probably not. So if that's the case, my recommendation would be, and this isn't a perfect solution, get an Airbnb for a month. Say you're out of the UK, for example, you come back in and you want to get sorted. So get your insurance registered to there, get any mail that would come to the Airbnb, and then use the Royal Mail Service to then forward any mail from that B&B to your PO box after that month period. Another thing to add is insurance can vary wildly from place to place. So initially, when I was getting quotes for where I was when I was in a house, the insurance quote was £1,800, and when I sort of worked things through in my head and changed it to register the vehicle, the accountants, and worked out it made sense to register it through the business, the quote was pretty much half that. So it's just something to bear in mind. Is there any creative way that you can register the vehicle to a location, maybe a friend or family, that's got cheaper insurance? The next question is relating to, do I get disturbed? Do I get knocks on the door? And the simple answer to that is no. Over the last year, one time someone's knocked on the van and it was just a gentle tap one morning because workmen wanted to trim the hedge where I was parked. So I think having a stealthy vehicle helps with that a lot, because you wouldn't necessarily know there's anybody in there. The only giveaways potentially are the cracked windows sometimes, which are open a little bit, and you could see the exhaust on the diesel heater under the van, but it's so subtle that most people can't be sure that anybody's in there, so why would they bother give me the knock, so to speak? So the next question is, why did I get such a small van? Why not get a Sprinter or a larger motorhome? And I've owned a motorhome in the past and I found it a right pain to drive around, really inefficient on fuel. And I found myself just needing to stay at campsites really. And because of the expensive campsites these days, it just doesn't make sense. You're talking sometimes the cost of a hotel to stay in a campsite, like £30 or £40 for a night, which is just absolutely mental. And there's part of me that would love to get a Sprinter all kitted out with all the cooking facilities and being able to stand up and things like that. But the Sprinter certainly wouldn't allow me to fly under the radar and go stealth with the smaller van. I only really want to go in it at night time to sleep in it and maybe nip in at lunchtime for half an hour to cook a meal. Outside of that, the intention is to stay outside of the van. So you may be wondering, if I don't spend much time in the van, where do I spend time? Well, sometimes I'm going around to different sites around the country, but if I'm in my hometown, I will go to, some of you may be familiar with it, David Lloyd. It's a gym, leisure centre type place that's got co-working facilities there. So I'll normally go there in the morning, set up my laptop, and then intersperse that with some stretching in the gym, playing a bit of tennis, sauna, steam room, jacuzzi. And I feel like with the smaller vehicle, I can literally park up anywhere in a residential area, car parks with the height restrictions I can get under. And for example, one of my clients has got an underground car park, so I go there quite often, and it would be tricky to get to their office if I had to park half a mile down the road, and then walk in. So there was just a few factors that just sort of drew me towards going for the smaller van. And 1 year on, genuinely, absolutely no complaints. You know, in 10 years time, if I get another van, I probably would go for a Sprinter, but for where I am at the moment, it suits me perfect. One other thing people have said is they've commented on how expensive the van is and how inaccessible van life can be. And I was expecting comments about the cost of the van, because I said at the end of a previous video that it was £35,000 now. I also stated that I would ideally have spent something like £20,000 and got something that was 3 or 4 years older, but circumstances meant that because I'd been out of the country for 3.5 years, I couldn't get credit on a used Ford vehicle, but Ford would give me credit on a brand new vehicle. I don't know why that is, but that left me in a predicament where I could either get an older vehicle, you know, in the £5,000 to £10,000 bracket, which I did view a few vans. But in the past, I've had problems with cars, you know, engines blown up, something wrong with a fuel line in another car. And so with a van, if you've got a van that's 10 years old and done 100,000 miles, you don't know how hard that van's been worked. And so you could spend 10 grand on a van and it gives up the ghost 6 months later. So I am paying a premium for the peace of mind that a new vehicle brings to me. It's just a factor to bear in mind. If you don't have the money, then I would recommend something like a Nissan NV200. I was looking at those, and for sort of 4 to 6 grand, you can get a half decent one, and that could be your way to get into van life. And then obviously you can do a no build fit out in it, like I think it's Cheap RV Living. Bob Wells, look on there and for inspiration on how to kit it out really cheaply. So there are ways and means, and even for myself, there's always a process to go through to be able to get the van in the first place. I come back from traveling and I needed to save up for the deposit for a good few months to start with. And then I got the van and I needed to save up a good chunk of money then for a few months to get things fitted out, like the diesel heater and the battery and all that kind of stuff. So you just need to set a plan and then work towards that plan, and, you know, eventually you should get there. Another comment people made was about ventilation in the van, because I don't have like a max air fan. In hindsight, I probably would have got a max air fan. You give up some of the stealth factor, but the van that I've got has just got a little mushroom extract vent, which is rubbish. It's really loud. So I don't sleep with it on. I do put it on when I'm cooking. Aside from that, I've just got the front windows cracked. Another thing I have is the EcoFlow Wave 2 in the summer. And that's just a portable ventilation unit, which I sort of stick in the back and then put the hoses through the front driver's side seat just temporarily if I'm parked up. It's a pretty decent solution, but it is power hungry, and you do have to pull the hoses out and put them through the window every time. So that's another thing. When I kit the van out, or when I take the van to the next level, I'm going to try and fix the EcoFlow system in permanently and have it vent into a permanent vent within the van. So probably the most popular comment over the last few weeks was a guy said that it was akin to living in a prison cell. And I'll take that. If that's what people think, that's fine. But what I would say to everybody is, there's a phrase, get comfortable being uncomfortable. And so I quite like that phrase. So my thinking is that going through a bit of discomfort by living in the van last year has enabled me to save up a good chunk of money, and I can be a little bit more free and easy with money now. So I'm currently in Asia, and then when I get back, I'm thinking of going into Europe for a bit. So that sort of period of hardship, which some people might call, has now freed up opportunities for me. So that's one thing to bear in mind when you may be thinking, oh, it's going to be a bit of a struggle to sort of stay in such a small space. Another question is, what do you do in terms of the toilet situation? So in my van tour video, I talked about this 5-litre drum, which you use for having a wee in basically. But then the question might be, how do you get rid of that? Well, for me, I go round to watch the football at my mate's house every week. So maybe once a fortnight, I'll just use his toilet and just dump it off there. But again, what about if you don't have the ability to do that? Well, when I was in France driving down the toll roads, you've obviously got ability to stop off at service stations. So that 5 litre oil drum sits comfortably in a backpack. So you just shove it in your backpack, go to the toilets in the services as you could do in the UK, and just pour it down there really. Another thing I didn't really say in the last video is I transfer from a smaller bottle to that 5 litre oil drum. And obviously you need a steady hand, and touch wood, I haven't had any spillages over the last year, but I've probably jinxed it now. Okay guys, so the last thing I want to talk about is if you're thinking of moving into a van, there are a couple of situations or scenarios which I call mind maps, which you're going to need to ponder ideally before you move into the van. So there's the mind map for what you're going to do outside the van, and that includes things like where are you going to go to the toilet. I have like 4 or 5 different options. Where are you going to sleep at night? Where are you going to park? Where do you dump your rubbish? Where can you charge your electronic stuff? And then you're also going to want a mind map that inside of the van, which is probably a little bit more complicated. So for me, that looks like how I'm going to get from the front to the back, which takes a while to get used to. Am I going to be able to be comfortable in the back, move about without any frustrations? How are you going to go to the toilet in the back? How are you going to reach everything? So you really want to give it some thought on how the layout is going to be in the back of the van to minimize frustrations and just make your life easier. And I would say both those mind maps took me about a month to 6 weeks to really dial it in and get comfortable with how I was living. I hope you guys found that one useful. If you did, please hit that thumbs up, consider subscribing to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.